Just busy setting us up.
Mhm.
Right. I'll tell you when we've got a visual. Right.
Right, we're
And
live.
we are live this evening with Michael. Just trying to get you into the screen, which, there we go. Hi.
Hello?
Fantastic. Can you hear me, Michael? We're just testing our sound.
I can indeed, yes.
That's fantastic. So I just wanted to welcome you to our association's page. You are our first international guest.
Thank you. Well, I want to first congratulate you on changing your name and moving with the times and becoming the Axial Spondyloarthritis Association of South Africa. That's great news.
Well, thank you for your kind words. So I thought I would just introduce you to the group. I have spoken about you a little bit, but I thought I would just start to talk about our journey and where I met you, which was roughly towards the end of 2018,
Mm-hmm.
with my own diagnosis and I was scrambling around on the internet, trying to find somebody that could help me. And your name came up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where our association started.
Well, that's great because prior to that, in 2016, I had started volunteering for ASIF, the Axial Spondyloarthritis International Federation. And my main emphasis in volunteering for them was to build membership around the world and to find organizations that were not members and to try and build specific disease patient organizations where none existed. So you're one of our success stories, actually.
That's kind. I'm glad you think we're a success story.
Yeah.
So just before we get started, as for the why we got together, I thought I would just chat a little bit about you got such a huge resume. I know you were in the banking business for a long, long time, more than 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that your journey with AS started with your own diagnosis, which took 10 years plus, if I got that right.
That's
And
correct.
You've been involved in the Canadian Spondylitis Association. You started the association up and you also chaired that. And you've also been extremely involved in various research universities across the world, really. I've got a resume longer than my arm. You were also, of course, very involved with ASIF, which is the association we associated with. And you were trustee and secretary. And I know at the moment you are you're still very involved, although you physically want to say you're retired. I don't think you ever will retire.
Yes, I think of myself as a retired banker most of the time, but well, the volunteering has been very, very satisfying, and it's also therapeutic. You know, the informed patient is a patient who has better outcomes because he or she understands their disease. I've been very fortunate, really, that when I was finally diagnosed after 10 years of frankly hell, I joined what was then a provincial organization in Canada called the Ontario Spondylitis Association. And I quickly found that they were in need of new blood, and I became the fundraising chair of the Ontario Spondylitis Association almost as soon as I joined. Now, that association was really operating under the umbrella of the Arthritis Society, which was Canada's largest overall arthritis charity. And they worked very closely with the Dr. Robert Inman, who was the executive of an organization called SPARC, the Spondyloarthritis Research Consortium of Canada. So right from day one, I knew Rob Inman. In fact, he became my rheumatologist. And working with SPARC, who got a huge grant from the Arthritis Society, we were able to start putting on patient forums. And then we took the Ontario Spondylitis Association and two other provincial associations in Manitoba and British Columbia. And basically we formed the Canadian Spondylitis Association back in 2006. But all the way along, I had the support of Rob Inman and the Spondylitis Clinic at Toronto Western Hospital. We had a lot of support from the Arthritis Society, but nevertheless, it was a huge hill to climb to build a national association. It's Canada's a large country, and 11 provinces and a couple of territories. So it was a difficult climb, but we got there in the end, and we seem to have taken off.
You have definitely taken off. That's an understatement. So we're so privileged to have you in our hoods, obviously, and your support. I think if I didn't meet you at the time that I did meet you, and if you didn't continue to support my wild plan of reaching out to South Africa, I would have just given up fairly quickly, I think. And I think if it didn't become apparent to me how important support is from a patient point of view,
Well, it is.
This would never have happened.
Yes, well, I'm driven, as I'm sure you are, by the lengthy delay to diagnosis. My diagnosis was 10 years in the making, and during that 10 years, I went from pillar to post, doctor to physiotherapist to chiropractor and back again and round again. And I never got any satisfactory answers. I couldn't find out anything because this was in the days before the internet. So for 10 years, I suffered from extreme fatigue, pain, depression. I slept sitting upright for over 3 years when I was at my worst point. And I decided in my mind that if I could help each single person, just even one person, not go through that, then volunteering would be worthwhile. So that's why I joined the Ontario Spondylitis Association almost as soon as I had been diagnosed, and why I have continued to try and volunteer and make things better for patients, because we know quite a few things that we didn't know 20 and 30 years ago. Gosh, when was I diagnosed? I was diagnosed in 1991, so here we go, 30 years later. We didn't know a lot of things then that we know now. We didn't have biologics, and we now know that biologics, the sooner you can possibly start on them, the better is your outcome. In fact, I've seen some statistics that say that if you can start on biologics within the first sort of 2 years from onset, then you've got a 60% chance of remission. And that's an incredible figure. So it's all about getting to people early, reducing the delay to diagnosis so that they can get the treatment they require and, do well, live well with their disease, certainly a lot better than if they are not diagnosed for 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. And I think that's those words ring a lot of truth in our country, because the frustration that we are all feeling from a South African point of view is a frustration that's felt across the world. This is not an individual problem that we face with only in our country. What I've realized is that worldwide, everybody, so you and I both have AS, and if we really talk for long enough, we'll start realizing that there are so many similarities between us.
Well, there are a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of overlap in patient journeys. When we do our patient forums here in Canada, we usually have a patient speaker just to talk about their story, their journey from onset to diagnosis and through to treatment, etc. And we do that because it's always one of the most appreciated parts of the forum, that people really relate to everybody else's journey because they are so similar. You know, the insidious onset of the disease, the wondering what's happening, the wondering if it's in your head, the impact on your life in perhaps having to give up sports that you loved, the impact on relationships immediately around you, you know, all these things that people can relate to.
100% with that. So what I wanted to touch on, the whole reason why I've asked you to assist me tonight, is that we've had this big change in our name. And I mean, I could barely say the first name properly, and you must see me with a second name. This is quite a challenge. But
I know.
I thought instead of us having a huge write-up, I thought it would make a lot more sense if you and I could just chat about the name change. And I'm admitting Salita to our conference. She's waiting. So I thought we'd chat about why we are changing the name. And you have obviously been key throughout a lot of associations, assisting them moving forward with a name change, which obviously means that we're including a lot more patients as to excluding a lot of patients. So I think
That's
if you
right.
could, in simple terms, perhaps just take us through the motivation for a name change, that would be fantastic.
Well, I can, and it's all driven by technology, actually. Ankylosing spondylitis is notoriously difficult to diagnose. And one of the things that really can help determine a diagnosis is X-ray imaging of sacroiliitis. And the problem is that X-rays really can't see that inflammation in your sacroiliac joints until about 7 or 8 years after the onset of the disease. So it became necessary to say that somebody had ankylosing spondylitis when there was radiographic or X-ray imaging of that sacroiliitis, the inflammation in the joint, and maybe even the beginning of fusing in the spine. When MRIs came about in the 1970s, they were experimented with, and then in the 1980s, they started being put into clinical use. It became apparent when imaging patients with ankylosing spondylitis that you could see things much more clearly, and they started looking at potential cases of ankylosing spondylitis and realizing that they could see this inflammation, this sacroiliitis, at a very early stage, maybe only 18 months or 24 months after disease onset. So this gave rise to a new diagnosis called non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. And for a long time, in fact, until really 2018, it wasn't really understood whether non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis was exactly the same disease as ankylosing spondylitis, or whether it was something different. But since 2018, it's been recognized as one disease. So we now talk of axial spondyloarthritis instead of non-radiographic and radiographic or ankylosing spondylitis. So that's why clinicians and scientists started changing the name to axial spondyloarthritis. But where did that name come from? There was a term that was used beforehand, which was just spondylitis. But a lot of people didn't think that really represented the full spectrum of all the diseases within the group. As you know, the spondyloarthritis represents a group of diseases. They came up with another term, which was spondyloarthropathies, which I think is a horrible term because I can barely get it out of my mouth. And fortunately, that term has given way. The preferred term these days is spondyloarthritis. So spondyloarthritis describes this group of diseases, which includes ankylosing spondylitis, radiographic and non-radiographic, psoriatic arthritis, reactive arthritis or Reiter's syndrome, arthritis that is associated with enthesitis and with inflammatory bowel disease. So there came about this term spondyloarthritis to describe this group of diseases which all have common features but manifest themselves in different ways. And then they said, well, there's obviously a difference between people who have psoriatic arthritis and people who have ankylosing spondylitis. So they came up with two terms, axial, meaning the spine, and peripheral, meaning away from the spine. So typically, somebody with psoriatic arthritis would be diagnosed with peripheral spondyloarthritis because it's their other joints that hurt, their knees, elbows, hips, shoulders, etc. And they often have skin manifestations as well in psoriasis. They also, by and large, have spinal disease as well, but it's mainly what manifests itself mostly that decides on the classification. But anyway, just to come back to the point, so they had spondyloarthritis and then they had axial and peripheral. And we're particularly interested in axial spondyloarthritis because that's what we've got. So there is an organization called ACES, the Assessment of Spondyloarthritis International Society. They have a wonderful website with all sorts of educational slides on if you haven't already looked at it. But back in 2005, they started using this term spondyloarthritis. And then a few years later, in 2009 or thereabouts, they came up with these classifications, peripheral and axial. So that's where those terms come from. And as you said in your comments a few minutes ago, the term axial spondyloarthritis is more inclusive of everybody who has spondyloarthritis of the axial form. To talk about only axial spondyloarthritis excludes those people who don't yet show up on X-ray. But their disease burden is the same. They have the same pain, the same fatigue. It's largely the same treatments. They have the same lifestyle impacts, etc. So it's much, much better to talk about axial spondyloarthritis and include all those people who don't yet show up radiographically. And there's another dimension to that, which is very interesting, that ankylosing spondylitis used to be spoken of as a men's disease. I know when I was first diagnosed, it was said to be 10 to 1, males to female. Nowadays, they sort of talk about 3 to 1, and some people still get upset about that. But technically, it's correct. Ankylosing spondylitis, male to female ratio is about 3 to 1. But if you talk about axial spondyloarthritis, the whole spectrum, including non-radiographic, the male to female ratio is 1 to 1. So that I found was a very interesting statistic. And why is that? It is because not everybody who starts with axial spondyloarthritis actually progresses to fusing and can be diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis. Even in the old days, people would be diagnosed as ankylosing spondylitis if they didn't actually show imaging, but they showed all these other spondyloarthritis features. So what is most interesting about this feature is that a lot of women don't progress to fusion in the same way that men do. So more women than men have non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. And that accounts in part, I think, for why women were so poorly diagnosed in the past. You know, they used to be diagnosed with fibromyalgia instead of AS or some other disease, or they were told that it was something else. Or I even know one woman who was told that she had achy woman syndrome. So the fact that we're now including everybody in the whole spectrum of axial spondyloarthritis brings in all these women who previously weren't properly diagnosed or didn't have a home, didn't know what they had wrong with them, were being told incorrect things, and were being treated very, very poorly because they didn't have a proper diagnosis. So that's a sort of summary of where the name change comes from.
Sure, that makes a lot more sense now that you've really taken it apart for us like that. And I think the disease has got a huge name because it is a huge disease to try and understand, even if you trying to explain it to somebody, you know, everything about it is big. It's complex. The wording is complex. The symptoms are complex. You know, that's just, it's not a simple thing.
It's a complex disease because it comes with extra articular manifestations, particularly uveitis and iritis. It comes with a lot of other comorbidities. This is common. We know from the IMAS survey, that's the International Map of Axial Spondyloarthritis survey, that, it's something like, I wish I could remember the number, but somewhere between 60 and 80% of patients with AXPAR have comorbidities. So, it's not just the one disease. You either have inflammatory bowel disease, or you have skin disease, or, something like this, or you're overweight or something, there's some sort of comorbidity there that detracts from your overall quality of life.
100%. And what would you say, maybe if you don't mind, if we take this conversation, I mean, we've spoken about the name change and the complexity of the disease, and often when you've been freshly diagnosed and perhaps you're living in a country as fresh as South Africa, where we haven't got all this support and backup, and we're basically feeding off all the international associations to grab as much information as we can to start educating not only patients, but also specialists, physiotherapists, psychologists. The spectrum's huge. But from a patient's point of view, because you yourself are a patient, what's the biggest, we touched very lightly on the high levels of pain and discomfort that you had in your journey, still might have. What would you say is your biggest, what is the tool that you use to climb out of the dark hole when you reach it?
Exercise. Exercise is wonderful. I mentioned the assessment of spondyloarthritis International Society before, and they have this wonderful slide in their educational slides which talks about the recommended treatment options for spondyloarthritis. And I'll ignore all the drug side. So on the non-pharmaceutical side, it says things like belonging to a patient organization, education, support groups, exercise. So all these things are quite important, that we know that to maintain flexibility, mobility, range of motion, you need to exercise. And those exercises can be very simple, such as sitting still and turning your head from side to side, if you can. I can't, not very well.
That was good.
So there's what I like to call therapeutic exercise and recreational exercise. The therapeutic exercises are the ones that your physiotherapy will usually give you, and they involve stretching and making sure that your posture's correct, that you're standing up tall and everything. But then the recreational exercise is also important for other reasons. A, for general fitness, and B, because we know that exercise is also good for the mind. So depression is a fellow traveler with axial spondyloarthritis, and we know that exercise really helps lessen the impact of depression, especially what's called green exercise. That is just being outside and walking outside, or running outside, or cycling outside, or something. Just being out there in green spaces, not locked up indoors. And when you're in the depths of depression, I know it's very easy just to stare at a wall and very, very difficult to do anything. So if you can make yourself just get up and move a little bit. That helps a lot. In my personal journey, I think it's exercise that saved me. I am not on any drugs. I never was, because by the time I was diagnosed, I guess it was beginning to fade a bit, or I was coping better. And then I remember one event, I was in the Caribbean actually, in the winter time, and it was very, very cold in Toronto. It was very, very warm in the Caribbean. Swimming in the ocean was wonderful, and it's because it's salt water, it's supportive, it buoys you up. And for the first time in years, I felt really relaxed. And I began to realize just how important this motion is. You know, as they say, motion is lotion, and medicine is exercise is medicine, and all the rest. I began to realize how important it was. And even though I was still working those days, and I was only really able to exercise on the weekends, I kept doing that religiously. And then when I retired from my banking career 10 years ago, I have tried to exercise every day.
It's interesting that was your answer, because that's always my answer. If you in a lot of pain, go for a walk.
Yes.
If you feel stiff, go do a stretch. You know, for me, that's certainly been the times I felt at my best is the times that I'm consistent. And I think that the key is being consistent with training, is not negotiating your training time.
Yeah.
It should be like brushing your teeth. You don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I wonder if I should brush my teeth. You just get on and you do it. So I think that's the same with exercise. You can't negotiate that.
Well, it is. You can't. You have to build it into your daily regime and just go with it. Now, I hear a lot of people say, oh, they're in too much pain to exercise. I understand that. I mean, I've been there, but there's always something you can do. Even sitting in a chair, you can do exercises. And, you know, on the internet, you can find these exercises, or lying down. I used to lie on the floor stretching for about an hour a day. So I got relatively good posture because I'd always lie on the floor with my hands up behind me, you know, flat on the floor. So I was straightening my kyphosis and my neck.
Yes.
And then I would do other stretching exercises that were important to maintaining that flexibility and mobility. And you know, you always feel better after a bit of exercise, no matter how small an amount of exercise you do. Even if you're just sitting in your chair and you're doing body turns or neck turns or neck stretching, you know, you feel better for it. Yeah.
Yes. Michael, I've lost our feed with our Facebook group. So if you just excuse me, I think there's one or two questions that some of our members have that I'm just going to grab quickly. And then perhaps we could just do one or two questions. I know I don't want to use up too much of your time, but I wanted to just check if there was any questions from the group. A lot of comments. I see we got a lot of comments about exercising and how great exercise is, and people are saying that exercise has saved their lives. I think
absolutely, I can believe it.
And I think, you know, so while I'm waiting for some questions to come through, I think that there'll always be the question, like, do I get a special chair? Do I get a brace for my back? Do I get a pillow to sleep on? I mean, you know, the classical questions. Do I get special shoes or special soles to walk on? Is it not safe for me to get into the pool? But I think the reality of it is that all of those things are secondary to the absolute necessity of strengthening your core, strengthening your mobility and your flexibility. Is vital.
Particularly. Yeah, you mentioned braces there, and that's a question that comes up a lot. But braces are really not recommended. It's better to strengthen your muscles than use a brace, because the effect of a brace is to let you sort of just go and not use your muscles properly. So I don't recommend a brace. I think with all of those other aids, they have their uses at times, but you do have to be careful. I mean, I know I slept sitting upright for years when I was, having my worst pain, and it was too painful to lie down. But there's a danger in sleeping upright in bed or in a recliner, in that you may get locked into that position. So
Yes.
you have to be careful that you actually stretch out of it if you're using something like a pillow. Some people use these big bolster pillows and they sort of lay across them rather like, they're grappling with their partner. And that's fine if it helps you. But just make sure that you stretched it all out the following morning to make sure that you're not actually getting locked into a position, that you're not constantly bending forward with your neck, or that your leg is not constantly bent as well. So you just have to be careful with those aids. They have their time, they have their place, but just be careful. Stretch out after them, and if possible, you can do some strengthening exercises as well, because the exercises that are recommended for axial spondyloarthritis are strengthening, stretching, and mobility. Stamina as well. So I recently gave you that link of rumafit.ch, which is
Yes.
from our colleagues in Switzerland. And most of those videos are under 20 minutes, but they concentrate on those different aspects of stretching, stamina, strength.
Yes, the remarkable thing about a muscle, it works like an elastic band. So if you think about taking an elastic band out of a packet and the first time you stretch it, it's really, really tight. So
Yeah.
that's pretty much how your muscles work around your spine. So if you stretch the first time, you feel like you can barely get anywhere. But the more, obviously, you stretch that elastic band, the more flexible it becomes.
Yeah. There's another lesson to that example. If you don't use the elastic band and you just leave it lying around, it deteriorates, it loses its elasticity, and then it falls apart. So that's all the more reason to use it.
And I think you're right by saying that if you just leave the elastic band lying around, alternatively, if you just leave yourself lying around, often people are going, well, they can't afford a physio, they can't afford to go to any specialized classes. But I think if COVID has taught us anything, that's the resources are all available. There are so many links, there are so many little videos you can do in the privacy of your own home.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
there's no excuse in today's days to say, well, you can't, you not in a gym, so therefore you can't train.
Oh, you can train anywhere. And um, Hippocrates said that walking is man's best medicine. And that was, 2,500 years ago. And he's absolutely right. And it's one of the reasons that I participate in Walk Your AS Off every year. It's a walking and awareness challenge, and the objective is simply to get people moving. Jennifer Fisher was the lady who started this back in 2011. She has AS and was looking for some way to spread awareness and get people active. And she came up with this idea of walk your ass off. And yeah, and it's been pretty successful every year. But the objective is simply to inspire people to get up off the couch and walk to their front gate, or walk to the end of the block and back. Eventually you build up a habit of it, and you can walk much further than you thought you could. And then you begin to miss it once you've built your routine up. You're going for, let's say, a half-hour walk every day, and it may take you about half an hour to get round the block to begin with. But after you've done that several times, you realize that, I can go more than round the block if I walk a little faster during that half an hour. So, in half an hour, you go around 2 blocks, and you just build it up until you realize that it's very easy to walk for half an hour, and you build it up to 45 minutes or an hour, and suddenly you're doing 6, 7, 8 kilometers a day. So it's a great, walking is cheap. You can do it any time of year, anywhere. So, and it's great exercise. And as I say, it's good for the depression as well.
Michael, we've got a question for you. Sorry that I'm looking on my phone, but I've lost my live feed. So Lauren is helping me. One of the questions from one of our members, if you don't mind taking a couple of questions, is one of our members are asking if you recommend pain clinics.
I do. And
Pain
the reason,
management clinics, yes,
yes,
sorry.
yes, I do. And there's an awful lot of research being done on chronic pain, etc. In fact, I used to be part of the chronic pain network here in Canada, so that was another volunteer role. But there's a lot of evidence these days that pain is in your head. I don't mean it's mentally in your head, it's actually physiologically things change in your brain when you're subject to so much pain. If you go to a pain management specialist or one of these wellness clinics, they can give you certain ways of overcoming this and reversing it so that you can actually cope better with your pain and you can detangle some of the tangling on that's gone on in your head that makes you think or makes you know that you're in pain all the time. So yes, I think they're a good spot to get started. There are a lot of people who have sunk down. You sort of spiral down with pain. You know, pain begets pain, begets pain, begets pain, and then you're at the rock bottom, and you can't move. You don't know what to do, and if you don't have somebody supportive around you to give you some sort of tough love, you're going to stay there. But by having somebody supportive around you, which includes, a pain management specialist or a wellness clinic, they can start urging you to get back up that spiral staircase. So yes, I think they're good. Yes.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, sorry, we lost. So what happened is when I lost our live feed, so I can see you, but I
Oh.
lost our feed to our page, and I'm too scared to disconnect because then the whole feed will go. But Lauren is feeding through questions. I just think that there's one last thing that I wanted to chat to you about. Is I know people are tired of talking about COVID and the effect that COVID has had across the world. But I think the message really is that it has been an extremely stressful year for everybody. If you on top of that sit with an autoimmune disease, so you can imagine, say your support network would have been perhaps going to a gym or joining whatever, and all of a sudden you cut off from a lot of your support networks that you normally would have. Suddenly
Yeah.
the world becomes a lot smaller. And I think it's left a lot of people stranded in a way that there hasn't been that support. So I think the message really has to be that it has been a tough year for everybody. And I think it will stay like that for quite some time. So I think mobilizing yourself away from your normal routine would be the best way to swim through this river, if you know what I mean.
It is. It has been a difficult year, and we don't know how COVID affects people with autoinflammatory diseases. There is a survey actually being conducted by the Spondylitis Association of America in conjunction with the Axial Spondyloarthritis International Federation on COVID and spondyloarthritis. And some of the early results are just coming out. So it's very interesting, for example, that if you're on a biologic, which kind of dampens down your immune system, because our disease means you have an overactive immune system, so the biologics dampen it down. And do you want to dampen immune system in a time when there's COVID, all over the world? So what that survey has shown is that people with the worst disease outcomes, so they've got high BASDI. Are you familiar with the Bath disease activity index? So
Yes.
they're scoring high on BASDI. but they are more likely to stop taking their biologic than somebody who's scores low on the BASDAI. So what we're seeing is that the people with the worst disease are the ones who are stopping their biologics because they're worried about COVID, and that's exactly the wrong thing to do. So, these are learnings that we're just coming across now. But it has been a difficult year, and particularly when you're more isolated and you're having to shield or quarantine and you can't do the things that you normally do. Thank God for Zoom. Everybody uses Zoom for everything these days, and that's a way of running support groups. It's a way of getting information out there. I don't know what to say, but just sort of grin and bear it. As the Queen said last Christmas, we will meet again. This will be over eventually. It may be another 2 years yet, but who knows? But we have to just build routines and observe them and make sure that we're getting the support that we need, whether that's physical or mental, and just trying to, as you say, swim through the stream. It's one of the things that we're doing for World AS Day next year, that we decided last year that our theme for World AS Day would be together, AXPAR and mental health. And this year it's together, AXPAR and mental health, your emotional well-being, because we recognize that everybody's emotional well-being with this sort of disease, can need boosting. And particularly in these times with COVID around, and it's scary times. A lot of us are in high risk groups, and we don't want to get it. So it is. It's very difficult to deal with. I would say just follow whatever your medical health advisors are saying, and try and build yourself routines that will keep you going.
Michael, we've got a last question before we're going to wrap up. I would love to keep you up all night, but I know your grandson is about to wake up. So
he's about to wake up,
yeah. I have one last quick question from one of our members, and then we're going to say goodbye. One of our members are asking, what role does diet play? Diet and AS?
Oh, that's a $64 question. I am a bit of a diet cynic, I have to say. A rheumatologist said to me a long time ago that he didn't see how diet could affect a genetic disease. Having said that, there's a lot of diets out there that people swear by, and if they work for those people, that's great. But I wish they wouldn't say it's a panacea for everything. I mean, there's the low starch diet. This is put out by Professor Alan Erbinger in the UK in the 1980s or early 90s. And nobody's ever been able to replicate his findings. So, is he right or is he partially right? We don't really know, because nobody else has been able to show that the Klebsiella bacterium is responsible for AS. So on that one, we don't know. Some of these other diets, certainly if they have anti-inflammatory foods in there, otherwise plants, that's fine. I'm no expert, I can't really talk to this, but my own feeling is that if you just eat a proper diet, you're going to be fine. And by a proper diet, I mean something where you're not looking at the nutrition label on food all the time. You're taking a lettuce and you're breaking it up and making your own salad instead of taking it out of a package. You're buying the best meat and vegetables and fruits that you can, that you really observe proper eating habits. That it's very important to have regularity and routine in your life. I'm a bit of a believer in the works of Dr. David Agus. He's a bit controversial, but he's written a book called, he's written several books actually. There's one called Short Guide to a Long Life, which is a summary of his earlier book. And it's very good. But he talks about the routine of life, and we do know that you have to have proper sleep hygiene. You go to bed at the same time, you get up at the same time, and it's the same with diet. You have to have breakfast at the same time, lunch at the same time, dinner at the same time every day. Avoid all the snacks and stuff that can add calories to your diet. And the other lesson from that is that you breakfast like an emperor, lunch like a queen, and dinner like a pauper. So, so diet, I don't know. I'm not an expert on it. I see it come up all the time. I know some people absolutely swear by some diets, but that's usually because they've only just gone on the diet. Ask them 3 or 4 years later. Personally, I think there's a huge placebo effect in there. People have gone through a long journey to diagnosis. They felt out of control. The doctors may not have been listening to them, still may not be listening to them, and they latch on to diet as something that they can control. So obviously, if they start looking at diet, maybe for the first time in their lives, and they're actually cooking proper foods instead of eating ready-made foods, obviously they're going to feel better for that. I'd like to know what else changes when people change diet. Do they start exercising or not? Do they quit smoking or not? You know, what else are they doing? Is it just the diet, or is it some combination of these other things? I think probably that's as much as I have to say about diet. If it works for you, great, but don't tell everybody it's a panacea for them.
Yeah, with Christmas coming up, I would hate to talk about that right now. Personally, I'm going to climb into everything that hits my plate.
I know. I used to lose weight easily after Christmas, but I found that in recent years it takes me an extra couple of weeks to get rid of those 2 or 3
Yeah,
extra pounds.
yeah. We wanted to just, from South Africa's side, just thank you so much for the support. You've been amazing, and thank you for being willing to have a chat to us and decipher this big name change that nobody could really get their heads around, and just also
Yeah.
having a chat and connecting us to the rest of the world, which is been amazing. And
Well,
I wanted to wish you and your family and your grandkids that you're looking after the best Christmas.
thank you. Yes. We hope we
And
can see them at Christmas.
yes, I mean, let's hope your situation stays under control, and then we'll
Yeah,
look forward to doing this again in the new year with you and having more chats. And it's
absolutely.
been
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, you're welcome. And it's great to have South Africa as part of the global AXPAR community.
Yes, we're happy. We're moving. Finally, our name was registered today, so that was a pretty big
Wonderful.
accomplishment.
Good.
So it's all happening as we had the chat the other day. So small
Yeah.
baby steps.
Good. Yes. Well, thank you very much, and best to you and your members for Christmas and the New Year.
Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
We'll
Bye-bye.
talk soon. Bye.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.